Thanks so much, Angine. Thank you everyone for joining us on this Monday evening. It was a lovely weekend in parts of the province, so we appreciate you taking the time to sign in to discuss some of the finer points of practice around operationalizing vaccine programs. And what we're looking to do tonight is really give sort of a practical approach to how you might be able to optimize some of the operations within your pharmacy practice, whether you're a pharmacy owner, employee pharmacist, or pharmacy technician, or pharmacy team member, just wanting to help assist your team in a hopefully smoother and more balanced immunization season coming into the fall as we get into the throes of respiratory illness season. So before we get into the bulk of the presentation, we have our mandatory disclosures slide. If I can flip these here. So as Angine had mentioned, this program has received financial support from Pfizer in the form of an unrestricted educational grant. We thank Pfizer for their support of OPA's Signature Learning Series on 10 years of immunization. My name is Jen Belcher, and I have had relationships in the form of sitting on speakers bureaus and advisory boards for both Pfizer and Sanofi Pasteur in the immunization space. I have not received a speaker's fee for this learning activity this evening.
Hi, everybody. My name is Annie Harb. I have no current or past relationships with commercial entities, and I have received a speaker's fee from OPA for this learning activity. So to get into everything, over the last 2 years, each of us have experienced a vaccine volume that we never previously fathomed possible to manage within our pharmacies. But nevertheless, we persisted. With that persistence, I believe, came so many challenges, but we also learned so many lessons. Today, Jen and I are going to share key lessons surrounding the vaccine delivery and optimizations within the pharmacy. So hopefully from what we've learned, we can share some of that success with you. By the end of this course, you should be able to act on the vaccine delivery operational efficiency opportunities within your practice, create situational protocols for vaccination while appropriately utilizing each team member based on what situation you're in. Design effective communication strategies for your pharmacy's vaccine program, and also enable your team and educate them to identify on vaccination needs year-round. So, although we've persisted, we're also very burnt out. Anyone you speak to, I think, in the pharmacy community over the last 2.5 years, and really even before then, can say they've experienced burnout. So sprints within a marathon. We're burnt out by volume at this point. I remember walking in to the pharmacy in the height of the COVID vaccine, and before the pharmacy even opened, a lineup flowing through the corridor, out the main doors, and everybody just waiting. And knowing that no matter what type of Yeti cup I had my coffee in, I was not getting a single sip of warm coffee that day. We were burnt out by information. Many a times the public was learning information the moment we were, and the phones were ringing before we even knew that the news had announced something had changed. And we were just burnt out by public expectations and demands. No matter what we were prepared for, it generally was not enough to handle what was coming our way. And I think because of this, and what we're hoping to do today is be able to share with you the strategies, what we found, where we found efficiencies, and how we were able to help people get through burnout. I know for myself, I experienced it at different stages throughout the pandemic, and again, even before that, every single flu season as people walked in. And I think one of the key things that we're going to look at today is figuring out how we've managed to make that a little bit more manageable for everybody throughout the day-to-day, and where to pull it out of the pharmacy, and how we can really identify where the needs are for each individual pharmacy. No two pharmacies are the same. No two pharmacy teams are the same. So how do we make sure that everybody can get through the day and go home and still feel like they can come back tomorrow?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, Annie, because it's that idea of constantly having to come back tomorrow. And with what the pharmacy teams have done throughout this pandemic to support our communities, it's really absolutely extraordinary. You know, the point at which we're at right now, we're on the precipice of pharmacy teams having delivered over 9 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine. And then add on top of that, the influenza vaccine that we've delivered over the last several years. Then you factor in routine and other vaccines. And really, pharmacy teams have been an absolute champion of immunization within the community. And in many cases, we've been the source of information that people have turned to when they're not sure what's going on, you know, if they're eligible, to find out, you know, when they might be able to come in and get vaccinated. And the, you know, as you mentioned, just the overwhelming demand of that communication can be a lot to carry, even within your own social sphere. I remember at one point looking at my cell phone, and, you know, there were 7 or 8 different text messages I had from people that I know and love and always look forward to talking to. And when I sort of read the highlights that they were all vaccine related questions, I appreciated their trust in me and, you know, coming to me as their trusted source of information, because knowing that I would give them good quality information, that I knew what I was talking about, you know, that I was a vaccine authority in their eyes. But the idea of having to type that all out and individualize, you know, some of the information that I was giving to people based off of their scenarios in my personal life, on top of all of the questions and demands in my professional life, it just felt completely overwhelming at times. And, you know, I really struggled with that balance of trying to find any semblance of a personal life that balanced with my professional responsibilities at times throughout the pandemic. I think, you know, we all know some of those times where policy changed very rapidly, vaccine eligibility expanded from priority populations to 18 plus in a moment, and we had to pivot and redo our plans for immunization clinics. And, you know, the burnout is really real. And I think, you know, it's something that we're all living with. We're much more in a state of chronic burnout. And we heard that from you, our OPA members, in our professional needs assessment survey. So thank you to all of you who answered that, you know, in that some of the top personal and professional challenges that you see yourself facing are how to manage workload and that personal level of burnout and exhaustion, and how that's weighing on you professionally. And that was across you know, all the different member demographics that spoke to us. And it's not surprising given how long we've been serving in this role, how unrelenting it's been, and how much pharmacy has stepped up. Because, you know, in community pharmacy, we have not shut our doors. We've shown up for work every day. We've been there. We've been a physical location, you know, serving our communities and providing care. And in some cases, you know, sometimes the only you know, building that's been open that's providing healthcare within quite the radius, depending on how rural you are. And I think with that, you know, feeling of needing to run that marathon, we've taken on a lot of personal responsibility for a huge burden of public health that previously we participated in, but we didn't necessarily feel responsible for. And it was a bit of a sobering moment for me last, I think it was December or January, as I was, you know, trying desperately to coordinate some of these high volume clinics that we'll talk about further on into the presentation. Because it felt like I had to hold up the weight of immunization programs in my community. And it kind of felt like at times I wasn't necessarily doing it as part of an overall team, that I wasn't just a piece of the puzzle, but that if I fell down on something, or I wasn't able to deliver, or you know, get the staff or the volunteers together to run that clinic, that I was really letting everyone down. And that personal responsibility really contributed to that burden. And I think trying to take that step back, remembering that we are part of a system and part of an overall team working towards that final goal of getting our communities immunized, getting those immunizations rates up to the point where we have greater community protection. It's not just us doing it on our own, and having a sense of community support for each other. has been one of the bright spots, I think, for me within our local community. I practice just outside of the Kingston area, and having our pharmacy community come together to support each other has just been really critical to feeling like you can get through. And, you know, I've said sprints within a marathon a number of times, and we put it as the title of this slide, but, you know, reminding yourself that you need to take that time to step back and to recharge and to plan, to think about your next move, because if you keep on running flat out, you're not going to reach your end destination, and you're not going to get there in the way that you need to. So hopefully some of these strategies that we talk about, that we get to in some of the next slides, will help you and give you some of that capacity back within your professional lives and your day-to-day, so that you can deliver on things that you need to in order to be that vaccine champion within your community. Or if it's just to get through with a little bit more breathing space at the end of the day, we consider that to be a success as well too. And we know that not all of these strategies will work for every team. You know, I practice in my location. You know, I was the only pharmacist. There were times where we were working with a pharmacy technician, but a lot of the times I was the only licensed individual within my practice sites. And then there have been times where I've worked alongside with the immunization program, teams of 12 to 15 immunizers. And sometimes that's within the pharmacy or the pharmacy premises. Sometimes it was offsite, and we'll talk about that. But that ultimately, hopefully, when you look at some of these strategies, you can take them and customize them to your workplace, because what technology you use, what communication strategies you employ, how you organize your team, it will all be very personalized to your individual setting. And really that will be the key to success, is finding the pieces for you that are useful, picking and choosing what works for you and for your team, and finding ways to realize that in your practice. Because one of the things that really, you know, has never been more clear to me is that one size really doesn't fit all in a lot of these settings, and in a lot of the communities as well too. So one of the things, you know, that we'll talk about first is how to smooth the demand of some of, you know, the inquiry that you get around vaccination through planned appointments. I think, you know, it's never been more accepted by the general public that pharmacy services happen through appointments, and where you can use that to create a labor and operations and a resource plan. Those opportunities are so valuable in terms of trying to ensure that demand is smooth and that you're able to handle what's coming your way day to day. We'll talk about moving it out of your day-to-day workflow and some of the strategies where, if you have a really high demand time, what you can do to try and ensure that you can make it to the end of your work day while still getting all of your other non-vaccination related work completed, and having the opportunity to try and dedicate some time specifically to immunization in a way that allows you to process a number of, you know, a high number of patients through to make it much more of a high volume setting and make it more efficient in that setting. Having a plan for walk-ins, when and how you manage those, so that you're able to communicate that and manage some of that more disruptive type inquiry where people walk in and expect to be immunized on the spot. Enabling your entire team to work to their fullest potential, because we know that one person can't do everything as hard as we try, and that can really contribute to burnout if you're not optimally using your team. And then when you do have some of the challenges that come up, how you address team morale, and how everyone within that pharmacy team can act as a leader in terms of getting everybody going and on the same page and working towards that common goal. In doing that, you can create standardized communications that can be used broadly and reused frequently. It's not always necessary to reinvent the wheel. So in that vein, also using technology whenever and wherever you can. So as much as you can automate and create some of that capacity within those repetitive tasks, absolutely understanding what resources you have at your disposal and deploying them to the fullest of their potential is absolutely crucial. And then, of course, having year-round conversations with your patients about the importance of vaccination, trying to take some of those routine vaccines out of those high acuity times, but also being able to take advantage of those times at which patients' attention is on vaccination to ensure that their immunization record is completely up to date. And really having those ongoing conversations with the vaccine hesitant year round so that you can get them slowly coming around to the idea of having a complete immunization history and not having to only have those conversations at times when you're very busy with those other high volume appointments. And then some of the strategies for hard to vaccinate patients, because we know that the hard to vaccinate patient takes a bit more time, and at times where, you know, every minute of your day is absolutely critical to getting your work accomplished, having a plan and being able to manage those appointments more efficiently and effectively always takes some of that pressure off.
Okay, so here we're going to look at smoothing the demand. So smoothing demand, in this case, we're looking at scheduled vaccine appointments. As Jen mentioned through the presentation, we're going to look at a multitude of scenarios when vaccination can be delivered. But when it comes to scheduled appointments, one of the really important things, which goes along with every scenario, but very important here, is utilizing your entire pharmacy team. We have assistants, clerks, technicians, pharmacists, students, and every single person can play a role. Again, further in the presentation, we're going to look at how you can identify those and how you can attach them to each scenario. But remembering to have a plan in place going into each day is going to make your day so much smoother. I vividly remember when I finally grabbed a piece of paper, and this was in the midst of a massive lineup of people walking in for morning appointments and saying, okay, here's who can do what and here's who's doing what today. And it was so much more helpful than everybody, you know, for lack of a better term, running around like a chicken with their head caught off, which I feel like we've still been doing for the last 2.5 years. But it added a little bit of calm to the storm that we were currently in. And we've all experienced back-to-back appointments, people trying to go for lunches, people walking in hoping that they can squeeze in between appointments. And that's one of the really important things to make sure of, is that as you're scheduling your appointments, you have them set for the day so often. And I think, you know, a big part of being in the pharmacy community is us having empathy for people. You know, there's a reason we're in healthcare, and it's because we want to help people. And you consistently have somebody that this is the only time they can get in, anything like that. Plan ahead for those moments. Have extra appointments available that weren't filled if you can get somebody in. I know not everybody and not every pharmacy is able to do things like this, but if you are able to add in, you know, a casual open appointment, it makes it so helpful, especially again for people like us who are just filled with empathy when people are in a time of need. Determining your daily capacity, and this goes along with that. Know how many people you can vaccinate in the day, and having those scheduled appointments ready for them. You cannot always fit in every person that's going to walk in, but knowing for the week how many appointments you have available, how much vaccine you have on hand to be able to meet those appointments is going to make everybody's life so much easier. You don't want to overbook, but you also don't want to underbook. You know, I can count so many times when at the end of the day I realized I had a couple doses left, and I sat there and I made phone calls to our wait list to get everybody in, because you just did not want to waste those doses. So that was a really important thing that I learned, that knowing beforehand what I had available and what time I had available was life-changing in these high capacity scenarios. And avoiding scheduling those appointments during the high volume times of the day. So this goes with knowing when you have your largest prescription count coming in, and that's all going to depend on what your patient population is. Do you have a lot of retired patients in your community who are generally there in the morning or in early afternoon. Do you have a lot of working class people? So they're coming in after 5, a lot of families. So they're coming in after school's done. Being able to identify those needs will really help you identify when your busiest parts of the day are, referencing your records and being able to say, okay, at this time, I already have my regular day-to-day pharmacy patients coming in to pick up their prescriptions. I can't have 30 vaccine appointments at this time because I'm going to be counseling, I'm going to be filling prescriptions, I'm going to be checking prescriptions. So being able to kind of maneuver around that is extremely helpful as well. And remembering that we all still need breaks and lunches, because that's when burnout happens, is when those things don't get taken. So that's a really big part of it, is, making sure that you're still scheduling enough time that you and your staff are being able to go and eat, have a coffee break, have a moment to sit down, but also making sure that you have the time to complete your regular day-to-day items on top of this.
Hey, before you go, the downtime piece, I think part of what really comes to mind for me is also the reverse of that communication. So when patients are walking in with prescriptions or looking for refills, really trying to prioritize what needs to be done in that moment versus communicating out, like, we're right in the middle of one of our vaccine clinics. Because of that, we may have to ask you to come back for these 8 refill prescriptions. And, we encourage you in the future to either call ahead, use our app, our IVR system, and using it really as that education opportunity to try and help have your patients be a bit more proactive in their regular pharmacy business if possible, because I think patients do have that empathy. They're going to see the other people within the pharmacy. I know, during the height of the pandemic where we were physically distancing and there were capacity limits. So let's take that opportunity and that awareness of people that perhaps this is a busier time in the pharmacy and we're doing something really valuable to the community with that time, and our time is important, to have those conversations with patients and just plant that seed, or, remind them that, as much as, we're going to prioritize this for you, absolutely. But having that entire team aware of what your vaccine clinic appointment hours are, and trying to really set patient expectations around timelines for regular pharmacy services during those clinic times. So as much as it's, planning for the downtimes when you're not as busy, and that can be identified, even, most people have a general feeling for what times there are, but at the same time, depending on what pharmacy software system you use, you can actually look at some of those workflow reports and try and identify operationally, what are some of the opportune times. Logically, in most pharmacies, I know we try and avoid opening and closing hours. I've always tried to do it myself, where even when patients are like, well, I really would prefer a first thing in the morning appointment, being firm on my boundaries on that and saying, we really don't start vaccinations until 10 a.m. We need time for vaccines to come to room temperature to reconstitute, to deal with, emergency issues in the morning. And just to have a communication plan for that, so that everyone on your team is on the same page, and that, you don't have someone who's saying, absolutely no problem, we'll have this for you in 5 minutes. And then you've got, 5 patients coming in the door for appointments within the next 10 minutes. And that is no longer possible. So good communication there, going both directions, I think is really critical on the scheduling of appointments. And sorry, I jumped in while you were in the list.
No,
it came to mind for me as we were talking.
I think that was a really great point, especially because we've been so status quo for so long in pharmacy. 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, over and over again. And patients have gotten very used to that. And, I think we all identified years ago that this needed to change, that we couldn't accurately provide our services in that time frame. But it was very hard to communicate when that became the norm to patients coming in. That was the expectation. And, no matter how much I say I have empathy and we have empathy, I truly think that everybody saw what happened during the pandemic. The public was aware that we were the ones open. And that's not to say that that didn't come with struggles and that people, didn't still have those demands. But I think, from my side, at least, I saw so much more understanding. And, you're completely right, Jen. That was the time for us to start initiating this. And I think that that's a great point, is that I think people are, we only had so much capacity. We were beyond it. Everybody was beyond it. And it was the time that we had no choice but to have that conversation. You know, we couldn't keep sympathizing with every single person that came in, creating the backlog at this point. We had to. So I'm really happy you did jump in with that point, because I think it was a great one to make. And it was definitely the time for us to start making it. And sorry, the last thing that we wanted to look at here was really taking advantage of the downtime to prepare for the clinic days. Not that we all had a significant amount of downtime in any sense of the word, but again, this came to utilizing the entire pharmacy team and saying who can do what. If we've already at the beginning of the day had everything prepared for all those appointments that were going to come in, use your assistants, use your clerk, use your technician, use your pharmacist, use the pharmacy students when they're now not doing the vaccine, when they're not now playing a role in the vaccine delivery at the stage that it's in for your day, and prepare for tomorrow. You know, preparing for tomorrow will make it easier, will make tomorrow's today easier. And I think that was, you know, again, a really important thing, and a really big shift when I did realize that getting out any information, which we'll look at when Jen gets to the technology piece, really changed how the workflow flowed, and how the staff felt at the beginning of every day. The beginning of the day didn't become crazy. The end of the day was just a little bit more smoothed out.
Absolutely. It's even just thinking about the number of steps it takes you to do something or get somewhere. I think one of the things that I became acutely aware of, and you know, this is, you know, sort of the personal anecdote that I have around the, you know, the COVID-19 vaccine response was, I joked about how it was the best solution that let me lose the baby weight, because, you know, things were nonstop and all out. But I realized through my wearable how many steps I took, especially on the days where I didn't have prep time to prepare for my clinics. Because without that time dedicated, usually at the beginning of the day for us and our team, and perhaps scheduling some time throughout the day to do those check-ins on, you know, do I have enough supplies at my station? There was nothing like, you know, having the vaccine in hand, bringing it over to where you were going to be immunizing, just to realize you were out of gauze or you were out of Band-Aids and you had to go back to where you just came from to pick something up. And I'm sure many of us have muttered something unflattering under our breaths as we realized we had to go back. And with each one of those interactions, it's not a whole lot of time in most cases that you need to go and correct what is missing. But when you add that up over the course of the day, and you look at, you know, sort of that cumulative number of steps, everybody wants to hit their 10,000 steps, but probably not because you're doing things multiple times because you haven't had the time to prepare. So that preparation time is really sort of key. And I think on that topic of preparation, one of the other real benefits of smoothing the demand is you can take advantage of those appointments to try and ensure that if you have multiple co-administration opportunities with vaccination, that you can do it at that point in time. And I know all of us are sort of waiting with bated breath around, you know, the announcement of timelines for the influenza season coming up this fall and what that means for co-administration with vaccines like the bivalent COVID-19 boosters, other respiratory vaccines, for example, like some of the pneumococcal vaccines, the newer conjugate vaccine that's come out in that capacity, the shingles vaccine, you know, some of these priority populations that we look at. By moving to more of this appointment-based system, having a plan for who you're seeing throughout the day, being able to prioritize your patients and your high-risk patients, and smoothing out that demand, it allows you to proactively get prescriptions where you need them for those other immunization opportunities, to take advantage of the time when you have someone there, because it is quicker to give someone 2 to 3 vaccines in one sitting as compared to having them come back each time, redo those additional consent forms, redo that additional documentation, monitor them multiple times. So trying to find those synergies where you can, especially if you're planning appointments within your capacity, right? If you're doing 1 to 5, however many clinic days fall within your ability to plan for as a team, that really allows you to get ahead of it and try and plan, days, if not weeks out. And that additional time really can make the entire process of immunizing feel a lot less stressful for the team and contribute to sustaining that long-term capacity, because constantly feeling like we're doing nothing but reacting is a big part, and not feeling like we have the time to prepare and having to make decisions in the split second because we haven't had the gift of foresight has been really, really challenging to maintain. So let's give that back to ourselves by planning for it. And there will be times, like Annie said, right, where you can plan for some additional walk-in type appointments, but that's part of the plan. It's not just having to react and opening a vial up and now needing to find 5, 9, however, 19 more people to come into the pharmacy to try and make the most out of that opportunity. So being able to plan, while it works in some scenarios, it's not always the case, but it's one way in which you can look to try and best enable your team to sustain some of this demand as we shift into, this endemicity that we're looking at with COVID-19 and that really highly recognized role of pharmacy teams as immunizers within their communities. We talked a bit about the appointments, and next, I think we want to talk about some of the strategies you can use where if your pharmacy is very high volume prescription pharmacy, you've got a lot of other clinical services on the go, and constantly delivering, in-day pharmacy immunization appointments or opportunities is really disruptive to your workflow. What can you do to still be a vaccine champion within your community that doesn't place that consistent high volume demand on you during your normal workday? And one of the things, and this is probably the slide that is nearest and dearest to my heart because I did a lot of this. As I mentioned, I was a single owner operator environment during the height of the pandemic, starting with the AstraZeneca program in Kingston and surrounding region. And where I really got forced into this concept of moving it out of my day-to-day was when we had that AstraZeneca vaccine that had to be used prior to the expiration date. And they were looking to pharmacies alongside public health teams to let's get this in arms before it expires in fridges. I looked at my pharmacy and I think we had about 1,100 square feet of front shop space. I had one private counseling office that we used as a private immunization opportunity. And I looked at our executive officer notices and said, okay, we can do this on pharmacy premises. The one thing I do have, I don't have a lot of space indoors, but I do have a large parking lot. And I do have the opportunity to use that space at off times when my attached family health team isn't in session, whether it's evenings or weekends, and let's take that space and turn it into a vaccine clinic. So what I looked to do was stop providing the vaccine appointments during my day-to-day because I was really struggling with my prescription volume. And what I did was I staffed with the help of my community, with volunteers and with other health professionals that were going to make themselves available in this scenario. And this is one of the reasons why Annie and I are actually so pleased to be presenting this topic together, is Annie and I had the benefit of being able to work together on some of our drive-through immunization clinics. But to take that workload and bring it outside of my normal operating hours. And so this does take the infrastructure, whether it be through parking lot premises in good weather or not so good weather in certain instances for drive-through clinics, whether it be community sites to do indoor off-site clinics, as well as various different congregate settings like retirement homes or seniors congregate living facilities. And pharmacy professionals have the opportunity to immunize for both flu and COVID in these settings, as well as deliver immunization that are not publicly funded in those settings as well too. So for what we did in our practice was we originally started our moving it out type clinics in the form of drive-through clinics using the pharmacy premises and the parking lot. And what we needed to do was bring on additional staff or volunteers and create some defined roles within those functionalities and do a fair bit of advanced planning to make sure that these sorts of things could run smoothly. In the first couple of times I did them, I had to do a little bit of retooling to ensure that what we were doing continued to make sense, and we had the ability to add on additional capacity and tweak as needed, because it's always going to be a learning experience at first, and people tended to be quite understanding because they viewed it in those early days as a real community service that we were looking to do this. So when I sat down and sort of looked at a structure, one of the key things for me to do was plan how many patients I thought I could accommodate within various different timeframes. And then once I had a plan for that, based off of my available staff and human resources and volunteers, I then needed to determine how to schedule. So for me, it took a deep dive into my technology to find out how I could either open up additional calendars or specialized calendars with different intervals and allow people to book in, and then how I would clinically review those patients as the pharmacist in charge of vaccination to ensure that patients had the opportunity to ask questions, that they received the information that they needed in order to be educated on their vaccination, and to be able to do this in an efficient manner. And so I did some of the deep dives on my technology and my booking system and looked to make sure that I really understood what I was doing prior to making any changes. And that took a little bit of trial and error. There were times when people showed up, for 8 p.m. appointments at 8 a.m. and were waiting outside my door. But we managed to figure it out. And what I found was that by creating very specific roles that individuals could kind of slide into, I was able to vaccinate at quite a high capacity. And we were able to, during the AstraZeneca weekend, I think we put through close to 1,600 patients in the course of 3 days. And then back last December, when we had the third dose eligibility open very quickly, we were able to use more of a indoor clinic setting with the donation of space by one of our local curling clubs to do a high capacity throughput booster clinic in the curling club. And we were able to immunize about 900 people per day using multiple immunizers. We put out the call to our local teams, and people either served as someone who volunteered at check-in to check people in to ensure that they were coming for their appointment at their right time, to direct traffic. So we had at times when we were running multiple vaccines, we'd have immunizers working with only one vaccine. So there was no confusion, and it was tried based off of age categorization. And we'd have individuals that were dedicated to patient monitoring after the fact, and individuals dedicated to vaccine prep and distribution. So everyone had a very specific role. They knew what they were going to be doing when they came in, and they received information in advance so that there was minimal training needed on the ground at the time of the clinic. And
I think, oh, sorry, Jen, I was just going to say, I think I can really jump in here to say how true that is. I received a message from Jen one day asking if I could come and help out at one of the clinics as a vaccinator, and the slide in play that she had created in the scenario was amazing. I showed up. I was able to get there luckily early before the clinic had started, and was able to start drawing up doses. At that point, we had an understanding of exactly what was going to happen, generally laid out for me. And at that point, it was just a plug and play scenario. After that, I know how to give vaccinations. I understand what's required. Jen, explained the information given to them before and how that was done. And we were just able to start vaccinating, and really, even the volunteers that were in at that point, it was absolutely amazing to watch that process. And just to add to that, I think in a time of, burnout, again, as we were all experiencing, this was a wonderful thing to see. The amount of people that came through, and something about it was different than the regular vaccination clinic. Something about it, took away the burnout that you saw running through, 300 patients in the evening, and being able to provide those vaccines and still being able to, have the conversations necessary, to give it to them. It was a wonderful, wonderful clinic every single time I did it. And I don't know how to explain it properly, but something took the burnout away in that moment. It took away the fact that I was tired. I was exhausted. I had 2 kids at home. I was worried about COVID, on top of the regular day to day. And it just made it made a difference, to the community, which I think made a difference to me in that moment. But I've this in itself, as Jen said, it's near and dear to her heart. It's near and dear to mine because I think it changed what we were able to offer to the community, but also gave me a sense of passion when you were starting to lose that in the midst of everything that was happening at that time.
Yeah, and I think, I thought about it a lot in terms of why it feels different. And for me, I think a lot of it was that you're able to focus on doing one thing and you're not trying to do everything. Whereas in our day-to-day jobs within the pharmacy, and I found this a little bit with, a lot of the walk-in traffic, you're trying to do everything and you're trying to juggle a lot of different hats within the pharmacy space because we do so much in pharmacy for our patients. And so to have the freedom to say, like, these are my hours where I'm focusing on vaccination, I have a specific event to deliver, this is the role I'm going to play, it really sort of simplifies it and allows you to dive into it without needing to have all of the rest of the hyper awareness of everything else going on in the background there for you. And it allows you to enjoy it a little bit more because all of that background noise in your mind can sort of slide away for that time being. And plus, if you have the opportunity to try and make it a little bit more fun in that setting, one of the things that we did was we brought out speakers, right? And at one point, I thought it would be great to see if a food truck wanted to come by, except for the fact that we were trying to encourage physical distancing in the parking lot. We didn't want to turn it into too much of a quote unquote party, but really looking to celebrate the fact that everyone was showing up in the community for vaccination, that we were here doing it, we were being celebrated. I remember it really hitting home for me at one point where I was on Reddit trying to promote the different vaccination opportunities across the region. And I remember seeing someone comment, I think it was on Reddit or Facebook, that our pharmacy was a local treasure and that, we were heroes. And just seeing that, I think really it was very emotional for me because you're very tired at that point in time. And some of it's choosing to focus on the positives because we heard lots of negatives as well too. There were lots of people that were very upset that they had to wait or that they didn't understand eligibility, and when they didn't get the answers that they wanted, there was a fair bit of negative interaction, and that I think really peaked for us in the times around the timelines of vaccine certificate mandates and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit further on in terms of safety and security, but you're able to do something and you can enjoy doing that dedicated task because you can focus just on that when you move it out of your day-to-day. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, is that once I learned how to do it, and it took a lot of work and a lot of planning in the background, but once I learned how to do it, it was very easy to rinse and repeat and do it at high volume in different settings. And I actually had my clinic in a box. I had multiple Rubbermaid totes with a bunch of my supplies already pre-packed, that if I needed to plan something within 24, 48 hours, I knew what I was doing, and it was sort of implementing a template. And I had even just a go kit for things like retirement homes, where I had my different immunization kits. I went out to the dollar store, had a variety of different plastic totes with my immunization supplies already that stacked on top of each other, fit into that Rubbermaid, and I could toss it in the back of my SUV, and I could find ways of moving it out of my day-to-day workflow. And that opportunity to work with retirement homes has been a great point of contact for my pharmacy, where they were receptive to having the pharmacy come in. And the retirement home clinics are a little bit easier than some of the offsite stuff in the sense that, you know, they typically are bringing patients to you, but having those conversations up front with the retirement staff that you're planning that offsite clinic for, having a plan in place, perhaps doing a site visit in advance if you can to understand what that layout's going to be. The more that you can plan and sort of have a general idea of what you're going to do, the more efficiently you can run it. And, you know, in many cases, throughout a 3-hour time period in the evenings, we were putting through 250 to 300 vaccines with 3 immunizers, 1 vaccine prep individual, and one individual directing traffic, and 1 billing and 1 doing Covaxon. So, you know, larger number of staff, but in 3 hours, it's a pretty good throughput, and it allowed us to typically run 1 clinic a week during the height of the immunization season, when that was really all the vaccine that we could order at that point in time. So that high volume clinic was a little bit more work to lead up to, but it left the rest of our week free for our regular pharmacy work, and really contributed to that stamina that I think otherwise we really would have struggled with. So we can take more questions around things like offsite clinics if people have specific questions around planning in the Q&A. But just being cognizant of time, we'll move on, because I know I tend to hang out on this slide because it really is something that made a substantial difference for me and my team.
And with Jen saying that, walk-ins and how to do them made a significant change to mine. So this is one that's actually quite near and dear to me, because this changed everything for us. It's in the midst of the pandemic. You know, the demand and stress of walk-ins is not new. We've seen it for several years during flu season. And, you know, I'm sure many people learned how to manage it, but at this volume, this was the first time that I had really sat down and said, okay, this is how this has to be done now, because I can't let myself continue to say yes all the time. And so one of the really big things that changed that for me was scheduling your walk-in days and staffing accordingly for them. So scheduling your walk-in days was me saying, I can have extra staff on this day, and I'm going to allow myself for today to be appointment free. So I would not take appointments on that day. Everything was solely walk-in, ensuring that the way that I laid the staff out for that day was much different than when we had appointment days. So when we spoke about on the appointment slide, making sure that everybody had a role and what that role was, that role changed a lot on walk-in days because you didn't know who was coming forward. But what it allowed us to do was still schedule, but not have people wait. So I knew how many people I could have. I knew when I had to have a cutoff. Sometimes people had to go and come back, especially in the height. But knowing what days I could do it on and saying, no, you can come back on Tuesday when we're going to be having our walk-in day, really made a difference. And it gave people who couldn't commit necessarily to a time of day, but could commit to knowing that I was going to be there Tuesday and I would take you as a walk-in, a lot easier. You know, making patients aware that if you come in right at closing, I might not be able to do it then. But, you know, making sure that they understood the expectations while still making sure that we weren't feeling overwhelmed in that moment. Again, staffing was a absolute massive change, knowing that I had a certain volume that I was going to be able to do, but might not get that amount. And in those downtimes during walk-in, prepping for the next day, prepping for our appointments that we knew were going to come the next day if we had a clinic the next day, was an absolute massive game change for us. One of the other really important things for this was scheduling and making people aware of that. Like I said, if people called or came in asking for a walk-in appointment, and letting them know that it was going to be a certain day, but also posting it within the pharmacy, using any social media outlets that we have, putting it on our pharmacy voicemail to let people know this is when you will be able to come in for a walk-in appointment, and adding any extra information on there really cut down on the number of phone calls and questions we had regarding the issue. Another thing with this, and you know I touched on this previously, was also identifying needs of our population and when do they need a vaccination walk-in day. So again, if we're working with a more of a retirement age community, during the day, during the week is generally a lot a lot easier. They can come in. But again, if I'm working in a generally working class community, having a 9 to 5 vaccination clinic isn't always as helpful for them. Or again, people with children who want to bring the kids in after school, if I'm stopping or I'm cutting off my walk-ins at 3 o'clock, they're not going to be able to get in their time. So really identifying what your patient's needs, and this can take time. Most of us are able to identify what our population is, but sometimes we don't realize exactly when they need us. So planning accordingly for those kinds of items was extremely helpful for me, and it also allowed me to make sure that I was giving all of our patients and the population in general exactly what they needed, because at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that we were able to get as many people vaccinated in that time frame that we were able to. The other massive thing for this is your on-hand quantities. Obviously, we were all limited at points to what we could have on hand, but making sure that for vaccine days, when you don't know if you're going to end up with 5 patients walking in or if you're going to end up with 100 patients walking in, making sure that you have on hand what you're going to need for that, for the possibility of that day. It's extremely unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. So definitely planning accordingly, and also making sure that that your team is aware of what you have on hand as well. There's nothing worse than promises that can't be kept in that scenario, as well as when you end up, as Jen said earlier, having that 1 dose out of a vaccine vial. And again, having 4, 9, 19 doses left that you're having to try and fill at 5 o'clock when your day is done. So those were all really key things for me. And like I said, for myself, it definitely took that demand away, and I feel like people were a lot more understanding, knowing and expecting what they were going to walk into that day.
Yeah, I think too, there's probably only one thing I have to add on walk-ins, and it's that co-administration in this setting is more challenging, but it's not impossible. Yeah. And, trying to keep in mind, some of those priority populations who may be more vulnerable and who may be more at risk, and who really do need some of those other adults or other immunizations in that setting, and knowing which immunizations you do or don't need a prescription for in terms of the NAPR scheduling of the product itself, as well as what is funded or recommended or indicated based off of age groups. Really, going into the immunization seasons, having that knowledge at your fingertips, doing those refreshers. Like, I'm probably preaching to the choir here with all of you who are signed on tonight. You are the individuals who are prepared and who know, because you're the type of person signing on to these webinars. But even just being able to share that information across your pharmacy team so that those co-administration opportunities and walk-ins don't necessarily pass you by and can be acted on, because there are many immunizations that you do not need a prescription from a prescriber for in order to administer. And as well, if you have a team of prescribers that you work with closely, say, you're like me and you're attached to a family health team, if you have prescribers who are willing to give you medical directives for immunization, or you work with your local public health unit, in order to ensure that you have the opportunity to immunize in the moment, any of those opportunities that you can establish in advance will serve you well, because they will save you time down the line when it comes to managing your walk-ins.
And I think identifying with those teams as well, Jen, if you are having scheduled walk-in days, and again, throughout the year, we're not just focusing on, flu season or COVID vaccines here. So throughout the year, and being able to identify to them, this is when we will take walk-in patients, and this is when we cannot take walk-in patients, will allow them to present that to the patient in the moment to alleviate that the despair when they come in expecting something in that time, and also allowing that if there is a need for it to be immediate for whatever reason, that they can call, and that discussion can be had prior to them coming in, because I think for myself at least, that's when the overwhelming empathy kicks in for me. So being able to schedule accordingly with everybody that you're working with, within the pharmacy and outside, really secures us having a lot smoother of the day-to-day when it comes to vaccinations.
Absolutely. And I mean, kind of the vein behind a lot of what we've been talking about is really like having a plan for quality communications, whether it be within your own team or out to patients. And the more consistent and clear your communications are, the less fielding of questions you have to do. And once again, it's something that often will take time that you'll need to prepare in advance. But having that opportunity to prepare and use some of the communication vehicles or platforms at your disposal to try and get that messaging out so that you're not having to have one-on-one individual conversations with everybody can be super helpful. And, one of the things that I tried to do as much as possible was preemptively message out to patients and have communications ready to go for some of these changes. Often that was not possible as we had policy often announced through press conference and we were reacting just as much. And, there's always that joke, right? We knew when Dr. Moore, when, Dr. Williams went on screen and made an announcement, or Doug Ford made an announcement about the COVID vaccine program, because the phones all of a sudden in pharmacy would start ringing and they just wouldn't stop. So some of the strategies that we use to try and mitigate the need to talk one-on-one with everyone were to craft proactive emails explaining some of the changes that were happening and sending those out to our patient databases that had given us permission to communicate to them, and using those privacy compliance systems in order to do that messaging so that you can transmit some of those messages, be clear about what's going on at your pharmacy so that perhaps people who are receiving those emails aren't picking up the phone to call and say, hey, what's going on? When can I get in? So when we look at it, we're in September now. We know, you're going to be working at a pharmacy who is delivering flu immunizations throughout the UIIP program, and we've now just had the announcement of the bivalent vaccine. Consider putting together some communications out to your patients now about what they can expect flu season will look like, so that you don't have, as people are calling about the bivalent vaccine, having to tack on, okay, and when can I get my flu shot as well? Mm-hmm. So as much as you can be proactive with that and try and preempt some of the questions coming in, the more you'll have capacity in the times when you need it. So for any of your tech-savvy patients, using email and text through any of those services, whether it be through your clinical booking service, whether it be through your pharmacy management software, to digitize some of that communication where you can use those pre-crafted messages and just customize based off of demographic or however you choose to, can be really, really helpful. And a lot of that can be automated through a lot of those platforms with things like appointment reminders that contain important information. We did a lot of sending out of vaccine information, so some of those counseling points, in addition to having people preview their consent forms, we would send out very specific operational instructions about what to do when you got to the pharmacy for your appointment, especially in the context of like our drive-through or off-site clinics. But also a lot of that vaccine information, anticipated side effects, those sorts of information sheets that I was able to pull from resources like the brand manufacturer, or like some of the materials from University of Waterloo or the Ontario Pharmacists Association, or any of the other science-based resources that are really helpful. I didn't feel always the need to reinvent the wheel, because I could pull some of that information and use those sheets and send them out alongside the information that's specific to my location, so that people wouldn't have quite as many questions when they came to see me, because I was giving them the good information in advance to review and digest, and then they could come to their appointment equipped for questions. One of the things I also tried to do was use my voicemail messages and auto attendants to give as much information as possible. And there was a point in time where I actually had to pay someone to just pull voicemail messages off of our system, and I invested in the technology in order to be able to do that remotely. So, when you are living through those high volume times, looking at ways in which your IT systems can support you rather than overwhelm you is really critical, because there comes a point where you can't always be picking up the phone. So let some of that messaging with your voicemail and whatnot do some of that heavy lifting for you. And basically, the use of any of your website, social media, and traditional media to relay key messages and ensure that those messages are consistent and understood, and that there are appropriate versions based off of scope of practice within your team for all of your team members in order to communicate that out. And I'm actually just going to flip to the next slide because it's sort of a continuation of the communications, because technology can very much be an enabler in this sense. So absolutely critical is remembering privacy when sending any information electronically, but using that technology to try and automate as many of the tasks as possible, because it's kind of, as I've become a parent, it's hit home even more for me in the sense there are certain things that only I can do. There are certain things that only I, Jen, can do in my family, in my practice, in my business. But all of the other things that someone else can do, how can I enable someone by delegation, by automation, by anything else to do some of those other tasks that are still very important and have to get done, but don't absolutely have to be done by me. And the more you can enable and empower the team around you, and that includes things like your technology enablers to do that work, the more capacity you have as a professional yourself. And you can either protect that time for other tasks, you can protect it for your own restoration and mental health, or whatever you choose to do with that time, it's completely up to you. But none of us at this stage in our professional careers will ever complain about having too much time by delegating and automating some of those non-critical tasks for you within your own scope. So with that, perhaps it really launches us into this next conversation about enabling your team.
It definitely does. So being cognizant of time, I don't want to spend too much time here. We've really touched on this throughout the presentation. But what I want everybody to be able to do here, and what I find so helpful in all the pharmacies I've worked in throughout the years, and right now we're looking at this for all of our vaccine clinics, walk-ins, basically every vaccine that we give, but it's just taking a wheel and moving it to the other edge, and breaking down who can do what. From booking the vaccine when a patient initially calls in with questions or wants to book an appointment, until the very end of their 15 minutes of observation time before they leave, and any communication there afterwards. So what I want to do is make this a little bit, a little bit more obvious for what I think we've all done many times in the past for anybody that's been in pharmacy for a long time. Which is when we shifted to identifying who's going to do what when we have clerks, assistants, technicians, pharmacists, and students, who's working on order entry that day, who's answering the phones that day, who's filling the prescriptions, who's checking the prescriptions, who's dealing with the cash, who's counseling the patient that day. We all went through that transition at one point. And we've all identified that within our pharmacies, whether they're big, small, independent, we've all been there. And that's what I found was a great resource to have with vaccinations. So breaking it down into each step, you're going to sit there and figure out what happens at each step. Who can answer questions on the phone? Who can book appointments? Who can provide counseling? Who can do the scheduling? Who can deal with the inventory? Who can draw up the vaccine? Who can send out, to Jen's point with technology, who can send out communications? And the list goes on and on and on. But it's something that you can do actually much easier than initially sounds. It's very overwhelming, especially when you think about all the steps. But what it takes is just a couple of days of documenting exactly what you've done for each vaccine, and then just breaking that down for yourselves. And then identifying based on scope, who can do what. And what works for your pharmacy for who will do what. And again, it's really going to change based on what delivery system you're using, whether you're doing walk-ins, whether you're moving out of the pharmacy, whether you're doing appointments, and it can shift. But what it allows you to do is at the drop of a hat, when changes happen, when ages drop from 65 to 18 overnight, it allows you to say, okay, I know who can do this. Now, how are we going to do this based on our staffing for today? It allows you to shift if you have somebody that's not able to do something that day, if they've called in sick. It's extremely helpful to know who can do it and who will be doing it. And those are the two key points. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time here just being cognizant of the fact we're already past 8 o'clock. But I just want to say that this has been a a game changer for vaccinations and beyond. And it's something that really helps people identify also who they can go to when they need help in that moment.
Yeah, and I think, that degree of specialization is really helpful, but also having like a lead and a support, right? Someone within your team is going to lead it, but you'll also have people that support that activity and can back you up if you need to, because over specialization to the point where only one person knows how to do things is a recipe for disaster in a pandemic scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really helpful when you're identifying who can do it and who is doing it, right? And that's, again, to Jen's point, it's going to change day to day. It's not something that has to be who's always doing what, but who should be doing what based on what we're doing today. So that's a great point, Jen. Leadership and morale is, I think, especially through the COVID-19 pandemic for myself, something that really sat close with me. I worked in operations for most of the pandemic and very quickly shifted back into the day-to-day community pharmacy because it was all hands on deck throughout the last 2.5 years, really. I haven't stepped back out. But it really made me acknowledge what I felt people needed in that moment and how I could help alleviate the burnout, because that's what was really important to myself, at least. And to, I'm sure, many, managers, supervisors, owner operators throughout the pharmacy profession. One of the really big things that I saw was acknowledging staff and recognizing their successes. I think we've all heard, what is it, Jen? Pizza's not enough. Pizza's not enough. We've all heard that, and I think we all agree with it. I mean, I like a good slice of pizza as much as the next person, but it wasn't exactly making me go out home at the end of the day any less tired. But feeling acknowledged and recognized was such a change. And I think a lot of that from my end, being someone in this moment, was actually hearing my staff's needs and not just listening to it. I think we all know when you just have somebody nodding along and agreeing with you, but being able to really hear what they were saying to me and identifying how I could possibly change that moving forward. And for myself, when I felt that I needed to be heard in that scenario, really coming up with solutions when I was identifying problems to people throughout my team during that time. It was, everybody felt burnt out, but there were slight things that I felt that that we could do and that others could do for me in that moment that just helped me feel a little bit more heard and recognized. And I think this, a big piece of this kind of goes back to, when we were talking about how something was different at the drive-through clinic that Jen had for me, how it kind of alleviated a lot of burnout that I had previously felt, because it brought my passion back in that moment. I felt what I loved, what I'd been doing for so many years. And I remembered why I loved it so much when you were quickly forgetting due to how tired you were at the end of every day, and dreading that it was just going to repeat the next day over. So really identifying what you can do for each of your staff members, because it's all going to be different. Another massive one for me in my position was definitely stepping in when other people needed to step out. Identifying when somebody was overwhelmed, overtired, overworked, where else could I shift them? And again, this goes back to acknowledging who can do what within your pharmacy. When can I move somebody to a different role to help them, to give them a break from what they're currently doing? No step is going to be more important than another one, but some of them can alleviate some stressors that people are feeling with a certain item. If it's, currently somebody's having a problem, they're feeling burnt out, having the same conversation over and over again with patients and with the public that are calling in, where else can I move them that they're not going to be dealing with that situation? Where can I step in to allow this person to have a little bit more, a little bit of time to to relax and build themselves back up to where they need to be. And what kind of time frame do they need for that? A lot of the times it's not a 10-minute fix. So how can I clear my day to make sure that that happens for them? And another really big one was just being realistic with the mental load that I'm taking on, as well as what I'm putting on other people. Jen, I think a great point that you made earlier was when you said that you felt like everything was on your shoulders, and if you didn't complete that, that the entire system was going to break down. And I felt that for a really long time as well, but I didn't realize how big of a stress it was to me until one day when I was out of it. And I looked back and realized that I had just been gone for months. I had just been in complete burnout state for all that time and not even realized that it had happened to me. Not even realized how quickly I was getting frustrated, how tired I was, the exhaustion, the lack of food that I had been eating for months on end. And that was a really big thing for me when I finally came out and realizing that I had put so much on myself because the same as you mentioned, I felt that if I hadn't been there and if I hadn't been providing these services, that, you know, specifically for me, I had nobody else in my pharmacy that was going to be able to do them. And it also made me acknowledge the mental load that I'm putting on others. And, you know, going back to stepping in when others were needing to step out was really staying hyper aware of how everybody was feeling, because a lot of people weren't comfortable saying that they were burnt out because we were all burnt out. So that was another really big one for me. And I know that you've been there, Jen, and, you know, as you mentioned, as a single owner operator throughout that entire time, I'm sure you experienced much of this as well.
I felt like I was a walking meme, the how it started versus how it's going.
Yeah.
My physical appearance definitely deteriorated over the course of the campaign, but I think what's really critical on this slide, and you know, I think we can kind of wrap up some of the other stuff because I know it's been talked about in other presentations after the fact, but what, you know, I sat here thinking, listening to you, is how all of those points around leadership really don't, they aren't unique to any one role within the pharmacy. It doesn't need to be the manager. It doesn't need to be the pharmacist. It doesn't need to be the technician in charge. Any member of the team can lead through some of the points that you talked about, and you know, and can communicate and can take on some of that leadership role. And it doesn't necessarily need to fall on one person. So when you have a team that all leads together, you know, and looks to support each other, it creates a much more positive environment for everyone within. And so, like, I love these points because they really are so universal to anyone working within this setting, and it's not just a top-down approach by any stretch of the imagination.
Absolutely.
So I know we're well over time, but we haven't seen any questions come in the Q&A yet. So please do, if you have questions for us, throw them in there. But it bears repeating, there's the role of promoting vaccination year round. I sort of talked about it at the beginning, but some of those opportunities to identify vaccination opportunities are things like birthdays, especially those landmark ones. If people turn 65, they turn 50, those sorts of things when you're considering what vaccinations might be indicated, funded, or recommended for them. Things like upcoming travel and trying to co-administer when possible. Congregate living transitions, if we know someone's thinking about going from living independently to more sort of assisted living, you know, do we need to vaccinate them prior to entering that setting to give them the best possible protection? And then also, of course, if someone's recently had an antibiotic or an antiviral for a vaccine preventable infection, you know, that sort of conversation about prevention versus treatment is always a great opportunity to start talking about vaccination, and having all of your team on board with this. And then considering times where you're using specific communication strategies like bag stuffers or automated text messages to promote vaccination and updating the vaccine record is something to plan within your yearly calendar of events.
And Jen, with this, I think one of the really important key features that I wanted to share, obviously, as the technician in our conversation, is really making sure that everybody in your team's aware. You know, over the last how many years, you know, I know what's out of my scope to have that conversation on, but in so many cases, you have people at order entry who are the people that are seeing, you know, here's somebody's birthday, you're having, whoever's answering the phone, if you have somebody working the cash, that's when the conversations happen, right? So that's a lot of the time when you realize that these birthdays are happening, when you hear about the exciting upcoming travel items that are happening as somebody's purchasing, as somebody's making a purchase, that, themselves or their mom are moving into a certain situation. And I think that that's really when these things can be identified much stronger than what currently is happening. And so I think really working with your team to make them aware, to be able to identify these facts, and making sure that the pharmacist can be aware to create that conversation further, because being able to identify is 50% of the battle at this point, if definitely not more. And it allows us to take, as you mentioned, to be preventative and ensure that we're giving our patients the best opportunity that they have to get any vaccination that they may need based on their current living situation or life situation.
It's so true, right? That trust that the public has in their pharmacy team. It's not just in the pharmacist, right? Like, it's in their entire pharmacy team to know them and to have what's in their best interests at heart, is such a powerful thing when it comes to talking about and promoting these sorts of preventative measures that can make such a huge impact in someone's life and health. And so with that, of course, we have our vaccine hesitant individuals, which sometimes can be a more challenging population to immunize. And, definitely when you're looking for a smooth operational day, it can be a little bit tricky. So Annie, maybe I'll hand it over to you on strategies for some of our hard to vaccinate patients.
Yeah, absolutely. This might sound strange, but I've always loved working with this population, mostly because I like being able to provide that calming effect when needed. It's something that I love doing. Whether we're looking at children, which are their own special joyous event when they're coming in to get vaccinated. Being able to be a calming influence to somebody, I think, is a lot of the battle. I believe that vaccine hesitant is definitely a different situation to work through. But when we're looking at patients that are there to be vaccinated, they understand that this is what they would like to happen, but they're scared to have it done, right? I know through the COVID-19 pandemic, I had a lot of patients that were nervous. They're scared of needles. They're going to faint. Kids who were mortified that they were being brought in for such an occasion, and being able to really identify what the patient needs in that time, asking the patient, would you like me to count down? Do you want to know when it's about to happen? Do you want me to talk? Because I'm happy to talk throughout this entire experience. Or would you like me to not talk at all, so you can focus on any measures that you're using to calm yourself down? I felt that really helped people, giving them some options when they felt that they didn't have options. A lot of people were there because they knew that it was the right thing to do. When we're looking at the COVID-19 vaccine specifically, or the influenza vaccine, but they definitely didn't want to be sitting in that chair about to receive a vaccine. So I think that was a really big thing, is identifying exactly what my patient needs in that moment and what will help them. And also really exuding confidence, I think, was another great thing for that, making them feel comfortable. And again, I think outlining the different options that they had kind of gave them more confidence that I knew what I was doing, because I was able to do it under multiple scenarios. I'm not sure why, but it definitely always calmed everybody down a little bit. And then
tell people that they were lucky they were coming to me because I was the best in town. I gave the best needle, and there's objectively no way of measuring that.
No.
I think I give a good vaccine, but ultimately, more than anything, it's just the confidence that people feel like they're in good hands where they relax, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you finished, they said, I didn't feel that. And then you said, I told you I was amazing at this. I don't know why you were so worried, really exuding that. And adding a little bit of laughter to it, I found, really helped people. Being on their level in that moment brought a lot of calming. And, that goes with validating their experience, is that, I think being able to read people goes through our day to day in pharmacy, but really understanding what they needed in that moment and validating that they had fears, and that those fears were okay, but that we were going to work through them, and that we would get through this together, and that you're there for them for whatever questions, concerns, anything that they may have. It was absolutely great. I think another point that we have on here that's really great is also preparing the supplies in private. Generally, if somebody's hesitant to what they're about to do, they don't want to see us drawing up the vaccine, checking the measurement. They would just like you to come in and go through the process with them. So that's definitely one, if we can prepare in advance and bring it into the room, or prepare before the patient comes in the room, is a great option to be able to provide.
For sure. And I just wanted to give a plug to OPA's education course, Mastering Injections in Pediatrics. So if anyone is, less familiar with immunizing children and wanting to brush up on any of their skills, either prior to flu season or because your pharmacy's recently received some of the pediatric vaccines for COVID-19, or you're looking at other vaccines, it's an awesome course that you can check out online. If you don't have your own child to sort of conceptualize what toddlers look like, I found that was probably the most helpful thing for me as a parent, is, sort of understanding what my child's anatomy looks like. If you have a friend that has a school-age child, that you can sort of get a handle on the sizing of children. I had no concept until I became a parent, but even just observing to sort of get a more familiar feel for what that looks like helped set my mind at ease, because I did start immunizing children before I was a parent myself. But definitely that course is well worth it if you haven't taken it and you're looking to brush up on those skills. And I think, one of the things that when we're talking about vaccine hesitancy and some of the challenges, just a quick reminder to have a team safety plan in place. I think we've all heard about the really disgusting and absolutely unacceptable circumstance that happened in Kitchener the other week, with a pharmacist being physically attacked, seemingly with the impetus that he was recognized for giving vaccines. And so as we enter another vaccine season for respiratory illness with flu and going into a new booster program, just ensuring that your team has a safety plan in place and everyone understands and follows it in any of those scenarios. It could be worthwhile group training to invest in de-escalation training for yourself and your team, because those skills can be very useful in some of those high acuity situations where people are feeling particularly vulnerable. And not that it's an official recommendation, but that should you be feeling vulnerable, you could consider taking measures such as removing identifying clothing or ID badges that would identify you as a healthcare worker before going into public. It's absolutely unacceptable that we're in this situation, but the safety of all of our pharmacy professionals is absolutely paramount. And OPA will continue to work with the college and other stakeholders to produce more tools and support systems for pharmacy professionals as we go through this. But just as we reach the end of the presentation, it just bears repeating that throughout doing all of this work and providing all of this benefit to their community, it's important to ensure that you're paying attention to your team's safety, especially with the increase in pharmacy robberies and this news of vaccine-related violence against a pharmacy professional recently. So I know we've sort of rushed through some of these last slides, and we wanted to leave a little bit of time for question and answers here. Angie, I'll save you coming back on screen if you want for the one that we have here about how did we manage the 15-minute post-vaccination observation period in the parking lot. And for us, what we had was a flow of traffic whereby people had a waiting area in which they parked, and we did have a volunteer that was doing the rounds within the parking lot. At the time in which we were doing drive-throughs, it was tended to be good weather where people could keep their windows down, and we asked that if anyone within the vehicle was experiencing any sort of adverse effect, to beep their horn or shout out for someone, and we'd have someone with them momentarily. Throughout all the different drive-through clinics that we had, we only had 2 or 3 instances where we had adverse effects that we had to manage in the parking lot. We did have someone faint. One of the benefits of immunizing in the cars is that if you do have someone who tends to faint on injection, that they're actually already sort of buckled up in a safe position, seated in their own vehicle. But obviously you don't want someone who has those sorts of reactions to be a driver in that scenario. So you may need to ask them to pull over and and have immunize them in a different space in the parking lot, if that is the case, to take them out of that normal flow if there is any sort of challenge. One of the other challenges we had in that scenario with the parking lot was the fact that we had to sometimes immunize in the thigh if there were very rare occasions where the deltoid wasn't a suitable site, and so access to that and trying to move that out of the drive-through space was a little bit more challenging, but inevitably we used our people. We had a pharmacist who was designated for managing the adverse reactions, so they were the first point of contact, and we had, of course, the response kits with the epinephrine and the diphenhydramine at hand in case we experienced that. But we had a clear plan that everyone understood, and that observation period was managed by having people park within the pharmacy parking lot with somebody providing that oversight, and just ensuring that people were doing okay out in the parking lot.
Okay, well, thank you both so much, Dan and Annie. That was a great presentation, so insightful. I feel like there's a lot of really good advice in there, not just for like vaccination season, but for running a pharmacy in general, or really any kind of business. Annie, Jen, any final words for the evening? Anything else you'd like to say?
I just want to thank everybody for everything that you've done over the last 2.5 years. I know that Jen and I gave this presentation, but we've learned so much through speaking to pharmacy professionals as OPA and really learning exactly what everybody else has done, and this grows as a team. We're really happy that everybody's made it here today, and we're just so thankful that we have such a wonderful group of professionals that's willing to take the time out of their evenings to ask questions and to I guess listen to what we've learned over the last years that we spent in pharmacy to see how we can make moving forward with vaccination processes and operations a bit easier.
Really, I just echoing Annie's sentiments there. There's just so much, so many things to say about the roles that pharmacy teams have played within immunization over the last 10 years since we were first given the scope to inject for the flu season, and the way in which that pharmacy professionals have stepped up and entire pharmacy teams have stepped up, have enabled OPA to go forward with, more advocacy around the value of pharmacy teams in a variety of different contexts, be it scope, be it funding, and we couldn't have a better groundswell of public support than what we've had due to the response of pharmacy teams within this COVID-19 response in terms of vaccination. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Keep on doing it, and we look forward to supporting you in keeping going throughout this marathon as we look to continue on these immunization programs moving forward.
Great, thank you so much. Very well said. And just everyone have a great evening. Thank you all for joining us. Bye.